Thank you all so much for joining us for BRAHM's Book Club, the April edition. And today we are fortunate enough to be joined by author Jim Hamilton. And we're going to be talking about his book, The Last Entry. In addition to being an author, Jim is also a ginseng expert. He spent the better part of the last decade hunting, planting, transplanting, consuming, and teaching about ginseng. He holds a PhD in Forestry from North Carolina State and is an adjunct professor at Appalachian State University. Before settling in the mountains of North Carolina, Jim was a Peace Corps volunteer, environmental consultant, AM country music DJ, and a volunteer fireman. So while he's written the requisite number of academic articles, published in unreadable journals to warrant his credentials, this is his first fiction novel and is an homage to the ginseng trade and was published in late 2019. You might have also seen Jim appearing on Vice News talking about ginseng, and so we're really fortunate to have our local Sing expert here with us tonight.
Right on. Thanks, Willard. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, my kids have both of them. Well, I still have one at Blowing Rock School, so I pass BRAHM every day, and it's exciting that y'all have so much going on there. You know, the presentation of the book club entry on Daniel Boone will be neat. Old Daniel Boone gets a nod in the novel as well, because ginseng was one of the many fortunes won and lost by Daniel Boone in his career of wandering the mountains. And that's sort of why I sort of can't talk about the novel without talking about ginseng, because the novel is really, you know, like you mentioned, an homage to the ginseng trade, but it's a you know, The Last Entry is a coming of age you know, story based in Appalachia, sort of under the background of the ginseng trade. And I did it because having read a lot you know, academically, and I read a lot of you know, fiction from Appalachian authors, and while ginseng has gotten some treatment in the literature and brief mentions, there had never been you know, sort of a novel that focused on it. And it's a plant whose conservation I'm pretty passionate about, and we're sort of blessed to be in an environment, you know, here in Western North Carolina. You know, ginseng grows very well here, and it's been a part of the culture and economy of the mountains for centuries, really. So when I sort of came up with the idea of the book, the foreword was sort of the first thing that I put, you know, pen to paper on, and then it sort of, you know, it evolved from there. I mentioned earlier, right before you began the intro, that I was working with a screenplay writer and author who took an interest in this sort of story idea that I'd come up with, and together, you know, mainly him doing the mechanics of it via the screenplay. I took over writing the novel. So I guess what I thought I'd do is cover really sort of some of that historical and cultural perspective which led to the book. Because I don't know if, you know, if folks haven't read the book, I don't want to give too much away, but at the same time, you know, a lot of people who have read the book who didn't know a lot about ginseng came afterwards and said that, you know, they enjoyed the story and they learned a lot about the plant. So that was sort of a goal that I had when I was, you know, putting the story together. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that. Let's see. So again, to kind of frame the story from the perspective of ginseng and its history and culture here, which I do get into in the book. I had the author who sort of mentored me and helped me with it kept telling me, he's like, quit being so teachy. You're teaching, you know, you don't need to be a teacher. You need to tell the story. So, you know, trying to break my habit with as an extension educator and as a lecturer, you know, at ASU was it was fun. It was a challenge, but it was really fun. So like I said, we're really blessed to be in an area of the United States where ginseng used to be prolific. There's accounts and tales of the woods being covered in it, and really, ginseng has been dug and traded and exported from the mountains since the 1700s. And just a little more kind of technical background. So we have the species of ginseng that everybody hears about and that's dug and sold here in the mountains is American ginseng. It's a different species than Chinese ginseng. So there was a French Jesuit missionary in upstate New York, really bordering Canada, who read a little, an info sheet sent from one of his fellow Jesuits from China discussing Chinese ginseng. And he had heard talk, the French, the missionary in the US had heard talk amongst the Native American tribes in that area of this plant that was used for lots of different health purposes. And it was used, it was taken by warriors before they went into battle for energy and to pep them up and that sort of thing. And he ended up sort of discovering and classifying the American species of ginseng. So ginseng has been used and taken and harvested in Asia for thousands of years. I think there were dynasties sort of won and lost and controlled. The dynasty that could control the ginseng trade, was very successful and more prosperous. But over the years, the wild ginseng has been exploited there. So when reports started coming back from the U.S. that American ginseng, this new species, had been discovered, that really started the beginning of the export trade of ginseng to Asia. Ginseng was on the first flagship that the U.S. sent to China as a new nation. So it was a valuable traded commodity even in the late 1700s. And in Chinese medicine, if anybody's familiar with traditional Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese philosophy, you have yin and yang. Growing up in Alabama, I always pronounced it yin and yang, but I got corrected by a research professor in China who came to look at some of the ginseng we were growing here, and I mentioned the whole yin and yang thing, and he's like, no, it's yin and yang. So Asian ginseng, the ginseng harvested in China is yang. It's hot, heat energy, and it's balanced. When they started taking and experimenting with American ginseng, they determined that it had different chemical properties, and it is considered yin energy. So you've got in Asia for the majority of people that take ginseng on a regular basis in Asia, they balance their intake and consumption of it via that yin and yang principle. In the summertime, in the hot summers in China, if you need a pick-me-up but you don't want a hot tea or you don't want to feel too hot, you consume American ginseng. If it's in the winter and you're kind of feverish and have chills, you take Chinese ginseng to balance out your inner yin and yang. So, and I will say that as a plant, it's not that's still wild harvested here in the United States. About 99% of that harvest does go to Asia. It is still the export market is still really important and the reason why the prices are so high. But then I guess it was in the 1800s, late 1800s, enough seed was collected and some entrepreneurial brothers in Wisconsin started planting ginseng, which really created the domestic ginseng market, the commercial ginseng market for cultivated plants. And ginseng, the harvest season for ginseng, and I elaborate that in the book as well, is September 1st, and that's the legal harvest season. A lot of people think ginseng is this kind of black market enterprise, but it's a very regulated industry, and the official season to hunt ginseng starts September 1st. The idea being that once the berries are red, the tradition for a ginseng digger is to pluck off the berries before he digs the mature plant, and then replant those berries so that the plant continues to prosper. But then the buyers, lots of buyers from Asia, either their own kind of domestic buyers here in the U.S., the middlemen, or buyers that fly in from Hong Kong or from mainland China every year, they start buying ginseng during that harvest period, and really kick up the buying and transactions of it between between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And they're really trying to buy inventory that is sold for the Chinese New Year. Ginseng is given away as kind of a gift of prosperity for Chinese New Year. Ginseng is much like in the U.S. For the new the father-in-law to be, or the golfing partner, the executive golfing partner on the business trip, you give cigars or wine or something like that. In China, ginseng is sort of that kind of little mini treasured prize. And when I speak of the wild harvested ginseng, a lot of the ginseng that has been traditionally sold here, or kind of the goal for buying and selling traditional ginseng, is old. The older the ginseng, the more valuable it is, because in that traditional Chinese medicine, it goes back to the what's the term of the medieval rule of, it's like a medieval rule of herbology, where human shaped roots or plant pieces, you're consuming a portion, what you're consuming mimics sort of what issue or ailment that you're dealing with. And older ginseng that has struggled through the soil for a longer period of time is thought to be more potent. So like I said, the Fromm brothers, and this is getting probably a little more historical than about the book, but it fits in so well to the context of it. So what we have in the mountains here, and what you might have heard or read people, hunting ginseng, they're looking for the wild stuff. The wild stuff is the high dollar stuff. Last year, the price of wild ginseng, bought from dealers in this area, sold for around $900 to $950 a pound. So during that, November through end of December buying period, that's sort of the peak of prices. But ginseng is now grown on a pretty wide scale in a few counties in Wisconsin and in Ontario, Canada. They grow it under shade cloth. It's mass produced. It's densely planted. It's pushed along with fertilizers and a lot of tillage and artificial shade. And the stuff that you see here in the picture, that stuff sells for about $50 a pound. That's what you see in the Sobe energy drinks, or the Lipton tea with ginseng, or those little yellow jacket trucker pills that you can see at the gas station that, for energy, for ginseng. This is the cheap stuff. This is the stuff that's mass produced and powdered and used in a lot of commercial goods. Whereas the stuff that we see harvested and coming out of our native mountains, the wild stuff, is where the money's at. And, it used to be a lot more common than it was, I guess, up until about 25 or 30 years ago. The price of wild ginseng might have hit $100 a pound, $150, $200 max. It wasn't until, I think 2007, the price hit right at about $1,000 a pound. And then 2013 was the highest price year ginseng hit. And these are the prices that a dealer would pay a digger for bringing it in. The price hit about $1,300 a pound. And that's the highest the price of ginseng has ever been. And when that happened, a lot more people hit the woods, and got more interested in looking for it. And, we've seen the kind of native population. It's still out there, but there's a lot fewer really big old plants out there. And, this area, Boone, where the story of the last entry, it's really set here. And when I say here, I'll say the high country. I don't really, and I don't know, Willard, you're reading the book, I don't mention a specific town name. And I sort of did that purposefully, mainly because I didn't want to get something wrong and somebody pin, well, that's not Boone, that's in Creston, or no, that's Lansing. So I kind of wanted to leave that open. But but really, the story is based here in the high country. I would say it would be a town like it would be like a Creston or a Lansing, where where I kind of pictured the story being primarily set, with some Boone elements in there, with that town kind of changing demographic town worked into the story too. But this is a historic area in the starting in the 1900s. Here in downtown Boone, there was the Wilcox botanical trade. The Wilcox family was one of the largest aggregators and consolidators of medicinal plants for almost 100 years. The Wilcox sold out to a Swiss botanical firm, I believe, in the late 80s, and by the mid 90s, corporate structures and changing times sort of shut them down, or they sold out and it sort of went away. But there's still the historic marker right across the street from Mellow Mushroom is still there, sort of marking that. So we are in an area where some of the stuff in the book really does happen. And for those that are tuned in, if y'all have any questions, I'm used to lecturing and be like Willard said in my intro, I was an AM disc jockey. So the idea of dead air is something that I'm sort of cognizant of. You never want to have dead air. And I know this is a presentation and should be interactive. So just blurt in and interrupt me if you need to. So these are some shots of some wild ginseng that was brought in just 2 summers ago. I was blessed to kind of be introduced and made friends with one of the local ginseng dealers, and he lets me come in and take pictures and ooh and ah over what's being brought in by the local diggers. So this is about a week's worth of what he purchased a couple of falls ago. The tops of the plants do have some value too. So some diggers will harvest the root with the top, but the plants that are sitting on the moss in the top right corner are the most valuable. You can kind of see by the size they're bigger, and really you can count and judge the age of ginseng by the neck. And I'll pull one of my show and tell items out. This is a ginseng plant that's about 30 years old. So starting there at the base of the root, every year the plant puts on a new top, and every fall when that top falls, it leaves a little scar. So you can kind of count the scars up the neck to determine the minimum age of your plant. And this one has about 30 scars. So this one was about a 30-year-old plant. And for ginseng, the older and bigger the ginseng, the higher the price. That's what the Asian buyers want those, good, healthy, old roots for those medicinal purposes. This time of year, if you walk into your own woods, I mention a lot of these plants in the book because they're still also very important to our sort of cultural heritage here. We had, back in the 1800s or 1700s, when the mountains were first getting settled, you couldn't just run to CVS when you had a sore throat or got sick. Our medicine came from the forest, and a lot of those medicines are still here. Bloodroot, which is in the upper left, that's the upper left plant, and you can see why they call it bloodroot. When you slice open the root, it's got kind of a blood red juice that comes out of it. It was used as an antiseptic. Blue cohosh is the plant in the bottom left. It was a plant that was used to speed along delivery of the babies. It was used during the latest stage of pregnancy. This time of year right now, ramps are kind of in the bottom center. They are out and about. If you're wandering in the woods, it's a great little gourmet food from the woods treat that's only around about 3 or 4 weeks. The tops of ramps come out. They started coming out about 2 weeks ago. They'll be around another week or two. Ramps were sort of the first fresh greens that our forebears would consume once things warmed up enough to get outside the cabin. After eating canned or preserved potatoes and starches, and maybe some produce that was canned correctly back in the day. This was like the first big nutritional boost of greens that we got in the spring. And then black cohosh, which is still used for a number of different purposes, primarily menstrual cramps and other things. So, our woods were a bountiful kind of, pharmacopoeia or pharmacy, and ginseng played a big role in that too. So one of the kind of motivations that I had for writing the book was, in 2013 and 2014, about the time that ginseng was reaching its highest price, there were a number of different shows that came online via Nat Geo channel and History and one more. There were these two. These were, I think, a couple of the more successful ones, quote unquote. There was Smoky Mountain Money. There was Appalachian Outlaws. There was Hillbilly Blood. There's Filthy Riches. And all of these shows were, they painted, number one, they painted Appalachia as what you see here. And number two is they really put a lot of pressure on the plant, because a lot of people who watched the show thought they could walk in the woods, find, $1 million worth of ginseng and cash in. So a lot of people who had never harvested or hunted for ginseng before started hitting the woods. And that's what really started my kind of a career shift into looking at the forest medicinals. I was primarily, my background's forestry. I work a lot with the Christmas tree industry here. But I, my first few years here as the extension director, we might have gotten 1 or 2 calls about ginseng in a year. People interested in maybe how to grow it or asking what the price of it was. When these shows came out, I was getting 3 to 4 to a dozen calls a week. Everybody was watching Appalachian Outlaws, and they knew that their grandparents had hunted it before, or they knew where somebody had planted a patch, and they really wanted to sort of cash in on that. Well, I ended up turning it into more of an educational opportunity and started doing workshops, because all of this exploitation of the plant was occurring. There were people who had no idea what they were doing. They were digging up really immature plants. They weren't drying it correctly. They were harvesting plants when they were too young. They weren't replanting the berries at the right time. Folks were getting into the woods too early. They weren't adhering to the harvest season. So that that was another kind of motivator for me to include some of those kind of hints and tips and history into the novel. I tried to create as many teaching moments that my mentor would let me include, and some that he said not to, that I did anyway, because I thought they were really important for the story, to really tell the story of ginseng. But some people use it as a hobby. Sometimes it's a passion. For some folks, a lot of folks up here learned or went ginseng digging with their ginseng hunting with their uncles or their grandmother or their granddad. And it's really been passed down from generation to generation, how to identify it, how to properly harvest it and steward it. And, the characters in the novel are very much like, they are very much like the locals who still carry on that tradition. I just in my job, and it's funny, ginseng is people who really know what they're doing with ginseng, or the locals or non-locals who have established a nice big patch of ginseng, you will never know it, because I kind of in the Vice News article, at some point during the interview, I said, the first rule of Ginseng Club is you don't talk about Ginseng Club. Lots of folks hunted ginseng in the fall of the year as supplemental income. Ginseng was something that was relied on and is still relied on in many places to help buy the kid a new pair of shoes before school starts, or to make sure that there's Christmas gifts under the tree come Christmas. Because when you get into cold country now, coal jobs are drying up, and I'm friends, Facebook friends and sort of professional friends with some folks in Eastern Kentucky that, the harvest of ginseng and other medicinal herbs is a pretty significant part of their income even today. And it was even more so back then. So these diggers are the folks who know what they're doing and who have been, trained up in it the right way over the years. They're actually the best stewards of the plant. And the reason we still have ginseng today is that our forebears really practiced sustainable growing and harvesting techniques. But with shows that came out that totally exploited, ginseng for the glitz and glamour of a TV show, really had a negative impact. So like I said, I started doing some stewardship and doing some presentations each fall, late September, early October. I do some classes on how to plant ginseng, how to select the right site. Because even though we do have the ideal environment and climate for ginseng, it does prefer certain forests, certain woodland conditions over others. And we've done some farm tours with some participating growers. So I've tried to, and that's that's sort of tricky to convince someone who knows that ginseng is so highly sought after and can be easily stolen, to open up their property to share some information with folks who are really learning how to steward it themselves. But I've really enjoyed doing that. And, again, it just served as further, inspiration for the story, because, and this is a reason why, the first rule of Ginseng Club is you don't talk about Ginseng Club. And I hope this isn't anybody's immediate relative. I did a presentation one time and had this slide, and I see somebody in the audience kind of duck their head, and I'm like, this is a relative, isn't it? And they were like, yes. But because of its value, because ginseng now is averaging, between $850 and $950 a pound, it is highly sought after. There are, in the industry or in the biz, they call them poachers, but they're actually thieves. And part of that stems, part of the tradition of ginseng stems from the days when there weren't property boundaries. 50 years ago, there weren't gated communities with lock gates and signs, and cameras and no trespassing signs. Folks, didn't put up property barriers as much as they used to. So, your traditional ginseng, and I know some very, I would call them, ethical poachers. I mean, they're wandering the forest. They're harvesting they're harvesting the roots on land that their great grandparents harvested from. And sure, they don't own the property, but they are also treating the plant with the respect that you need to have for it to be, enjoyed and harvested in the future. But this is actually this is a video camera shot, or a trail cam shot, from Tim Sweeney's property. I believe this is in Yancey County from a few years ago. If you look at the date stamp, it's from September 18th, 2016, and you can kind of see this was before COVID. But the two gentlemen in the photo there are wearing masks. They've got bandanas over their faces because they know there's cameras in the woods, but they're out there, harvesting, looking for ginseng. But with more and more people trying to cultivate, plots of ginseng on their own properties, if you go into somebody's plot and steal their ginseng, it's just like, going into a Christmas tree farm and stealing Christmas trees to go sell. It's the same principle. So this is probably one of the major issues, and probably one of the reasons that, there aren't more people planting ginseng. It takes anywhere from, 7 to 10 years for a plant in ideal conditions to get to a harvestable size. So, if someone's going to come in after you've spent 10 years waiting for this plant to grow and wipe you out, that serves as a deterrent to planting. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I've got a few. That's just fascinating, and thank you for providing so much of the historic context and where we're at right now, and just so much of the book for me, it like really talks about people's connection to land and connection to the place, and like their heritage and all of that. But I just thought it was the scenes are beautiful. Just the beginning where Tucker's grandfather is taking him and his brother through the woods, and that he's taught them how to identify all these different plants and taught them how to treat the plant and that stewardship and just it being passed down. I thought that was very beautiful. But just a question is, so does American ginseng only grow in like the Appalachian Mountain region, or is it all over the country naturally?
It has, you know, and it's funny. It's mainly Appalachia. I know it grows as far west as Arkansas. And when I started, you know, learning as much as I could about it, I'd always sort of appreciated it from afar, just as a forestry major and going on so many field tours and you know, having it been shown to me. Oh, look at this rare plant. This is American ginseng. The USDA shows the kind of the range map, and what was funny is the first year that I really got into this from a production standpoint and from kind of that passion standpoint, I caught the ginseng bug. The dealer and kind of my ginseng mentor, as I call him, he said to me one day, he was like, "I can tell you caught the bug. You've got it." And sure enough, I did. And I went back home, you know, East Central Alabama. You can kind of see from our property, from a hill on our property, you can see kind of the last hanging toenail of the Appalachians from our property. And I got on the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture plant species database, and I looked at the native range of ginseng, and it shows it, you know, coming down right about to where it's funny. It showed ginseng being in the county below us and in the county right above us. And we have there was about 6 acres of land still on our property that hadn't been converted to loblolly pine, you know, tree farming over the last 30 years. And I took a walk over to that piece of it. I was like, well, if there is ginseng on my home property, it's going to be here. And I took about 6 steps into the woods and found the biggest plant I've ever seen, bigger than any plant I've seen here. Nobody hunts it down there. It's so uncommon there. I mean, it's semi-common in the right habitat, but nobody looks for it. So that was really interesting. But I know it's being cultivated, you know, up into Canada, a lot in Ontario, maybe some in Nova Scotia, upstate New York. Really, the most valuable ginseng behind or ahead of North Carolina ginseng is Catskills, New York. The ginseng grows really bulby there. It's sort of like you'll have a neck and a golf ball with some trailer roots, and that, for whatever reason, is more highly valued in the Asian markets than even our stuff. But we're a very close number 2 as far as value. When you take the ginseng to a dealer, and I think I highlight this in the story as well, the dealer will look at the wrinkles on the root, and they can tell you what mountain around here the plant came from based on the color of the soil in that root. It's really it's just amazing what they can, how good they are at IDing it.
I have a couple of questions, Jim.
Yeah.
First of all, what did you do with the plant that you found?
The big plant in Alabama?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll laugh, Judith. So I actually, I was so excited. I dug it up. I dug up the whole plant and I put it in about a 10-gallon, 15-gallon pot. And I brought it back to my parents' house and set it, you know, I don't know, the whole, it was like catching a big fish and making having the debate of whether you let it go or you bring it back and cook it. So I had it in a plant, and because my mom was really interested in all of it as well. She's convinced that my grandfather, who had traveled the world right after he was in World War II, and he traveled the world as an optician. She was convinced that my grandfather had found seed or plants and brought it back to the home property. which I don't think, I didn't buy that, but that was kind of how she, rationalized it being there. I ended up finding about 70 or 80 other plants in there too. So a nice kind of native patch.
Uh-huh.
But I came back at Thanksgiving that year. So this was in the early summer. I came back home for Thanksgiving, and I took it back out to the woods and replanted it. And it came up the next year. So that's what I did with it.
And so what do you have behind you? There's a jar there and a little yellow box.
Yeah. So these are, I brought some other show and tell items. So these are a couple of very large, actually there's 2 roots in here. These are what we call trophy roots. These are just massive old, they're old and they're large. This is from a friend of mine who has a family property in Bluefield, Virginia. And we went, it's funny, his grandfather, ginseng planting and hunting and transplanting was his grandfather's hobby. And anyway, he knew, a buddy of mine, I coached his kids in soccer. He heard me talking about ginseng one day, and he was like, that was my grandfather's hobby, and my dad's been bugging me. He said we ought to go up there and see if there's anything left. And we loaded up the kids. It was about a 2.5 hour drive up there, and I expected to find a couple plants, maybe, if that was granddad's hobby. And we walked into the woods, and I had never seen so much ginseng. His grandfather had transplanted thousands of plants that had produced seed and proliferated. So it was, actually the story, the grandfather character in that story is sort of, I based, his grandfather on that and sort of what he did and how much ginseng was there. Because at the time I'd seen large patches of planted ginseng, but I'd never seen a historically old patch. And these, I kind of told him, I said, dude, this is like never going deer hunting before and bagging the state champion buck the first time you're out in the woods. It was like, I've never seen there were plants with tops. Other than the plant I found in Alabama, these were the biggest plants I'd ever seen. So that was really neat. And, for your trophy root, and what you do, and what a lot of people do for the medicine, is you take a few roots like this, or a bunch of roots, and you fill the jar full of moonshine, preferably. And the alcohol sort of extrudes or extracts the medicinal components of the ginseng. And some people will take a dropper full a day as just a pick me up, or for the medicine of it. And you can replace the alcohol, and they'll keep for years. And then this is so ginseng is also grown in Korea. This is Korean ginseng tea. They sell this at the Be Natural Market, I think, is where I picked this up. Korean ginseng is another young, hot energy ginseng. But anyway, I just had a couple more slides, I guess, to finish up with. Going back to the book, one thing that I was very conscious of, a lot of writers from the outside, or that haven't, aren't locals or haven't grown up here, write stories about Appalachia. So and the way that I felt that I could do that the best, as not just as a writer, but someone who's who studied forestry their whole career and who works in the woods, was really try and paint the environment and the trees and the forest in the most accurate way possible. And some of the some of the characters do have the stereotypes of Appalachia, and stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. There is an element of truth to that, because really, if you get outside of Boone, and a lot of people, and I tell this to my students, who I teach a soils class once a semester at App State. I was like, you really need to get outside of Boone every now and then and take a really long drive through the countryside. If you really want, Boone itself, yes, it's Appalachia just as much as any other part of Appalachia. But if you only see the Boone, town of Boone or Blowing Rock side of Appalachia, you're not getting the complete picture. And so the book is set sort of starting in the kind of the late 80s and then going into the early 2000s. And that's when kind of our area at least our little neck of the woods and the Boone and surrounding had really started to change. You had, more development, more people moving in from the outside. So, part of the story and some of the little subplots deal with how the mountains are changing and what are those implications for, for these rare medicinal plants that have served such a longstanding cultural role, for our community and the folks that have been here for generations. I mean, Willard, your family's been here forever. And, I think I told you when I met you the first time, one of my big ginseng guys, one of the most secretive that I know, is a Watson. And, that's growing and transplanting ginseng. A lot of folks that bring in ginseng to the dealers, it's not just stuff that they've, wandered miles through the mountains to find. It's patches that they have tended for sometimes decades that are hidden and that they will never, as much as I've gotten to know these folks, as much as they like me and respect me, there's some patches that I'll never be taken to or be shown. So, there's a few miles outside of Boone, sort of the Todd General Store, that unfortunately burned. That was, there's a general store, the Greg's Pelt and Herb Mercantile was sort of, I had the picture of the Todd General Store in my head when I wrote that particular, scene into it. But anyway, that's really all I have as far as slides go. But if y'all have some other questions, this is great. I could talk ginseng all day long. So I'm glad you put a time limit on me, Willard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this has been fascinating, Jim, and I really appreciate your intention with how you represented the area and represented the region, because that is something that is all too common. Is just like in those TV shows that you showed on an earlier slide, Appalachia is often misconstrued and stereotyped and misrepresented. So I feel like your book, it does show that there is poverty, there are problems in the area, but it paints people with dignity, and it actually shows the region for how it is for people that live here. So that's, I really appreciate that. And it's nice to read a new book about the region from an author in the region, and it beat so good.
Well,
Jim, I just wanted to follow up with that and say that I came across your book through the museum and I read it. I absolutely enjoyed it. It was really fascinating to not only read an entertaining story, but also to get the information about ginseng. So thank you for that. And thank you to the museum also for putting that out there. It was a really enjoyable read.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the feedback. And that was the most nerve-wracking part when the book went out, and I had a couple of my ginseng gang to read it, and some local, locals like yourself. That made, that was the most nerve-wracking part, because I really wanted to do the area justice. And, the whole hillbilly elegy controversy came up afterwards, about the time the book was being published, all of that came out. And I was like, oh gosh, because while I've lived here, I've been in the North Carolina mountains now almost 20 years. I mean, even I'll never be a local or a native. My kids who were born here, they really want. I mean, I know it takes like 8 generations and a good old killing back in the day to really qualify. And it'll take several generations for that to work out. But I appreciate the feedback, Jamie.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the answer, but as part of Willard's book club with the BRAHM, we also read Tom White's book, Boone Before Boone. Have you read that yet, Jim?
I have not.
Well, you want to read that. And I was so struck by what's called the Little Ice Age, and the fact that Boone, Watauga County, this area really has always been a quote tourist area. That there was no real settlements here, and it was primarily, before the Europeans, just because of time, the way time history was, because of the Little Ice Age. It was just too darn cold.
Right.
You couldn't grow, etc. I'm wondering has there been any thought whether that kind of climate condition is why the ginseng is so prevalent here, why it's so good for it?
Absolutely. No, that's definitely a major factor why it is, ginseng, for ginseng seed to germinate, it needs 2 cold seasons, and the colder the better. It needs several days of below freezing consistent temperatures. And there are those in the ginseng research field, and there's some 4 or 5 of them that are really focusing on that. But they're really worried about the potential for climate change to impact populations of ginseng. And I can see that, the plants that I have on my home property in Alabama, the older plant, some of those plants have probably been there 80 to 100 years. The one that I dug up was really old. And I'll tell you why I think it was 100 years. I think I counted around 30 or 40 neck scars. But sometimes the winters in Alabama now, we don't get cold enough for the plant to germinate. Ginseng's a funny plant. Some years it'll come up if there's a very mild winter, or if there's some other drought or heavy flooding or other environmental condition, it will stay dormant. So really, what you can, like I mentioned, the length of that neck can give you an estimate of age, because some years ginseng just doesn't appear. And I took some seed back to Alabama, thinking that I can establish this monster honey hole patch that nobody will ever know about because nobody digs it there. They don't know what it is. I planted 5 to 10 pounds of seed, and you're talking about 7,000 seed per pound, and the plants are this tall after 7 years. They have not done anything, and I think that is because the climate difference from where that seed was harvested. And the seed that I've planted, most seed that you can buy comes from larger commercial farms from Wisconsin and Canada. So that seed and those plants are used to environments that get that cool weather. The reason that we have Fraser fir Christmas trees, we're one of the few Fraser fir Christmas tree growing areas as well, because Frasers were actually a throwback to the last ice age, when the glaciers came down and pushed the northern species down. When the glaciers retreated, all of those colder weather species, the only places they could continue to survive were on the highest mountaintops. So even the Christmas tree farms that you see on 421, they're still not high enough in elevation to be totally happy. They're happier on the top of Grandfather, or despite the brutal weather up there. That's where a lot of those species evolved from.
So do you think, well, no, but going back again to the little ice age and right before Daniel Boone, 900 to 1400, do you think that might have set the groundwork for them to be here in the first place?
I think it was here earlier, personally.
Earlier.
I think it one of the first ice ages that pushed it down, and because your plant species are different than some of your animal species that get kind of have natural barriers that keep them from going one place to another. With plants also. I'd have to dig into that. I'm not sure, but I think botanically the species is a fairly old species.
So how old? How old is old?
Oh gosh, you're gonna put me on the spot, Jude.
5,000 years.
These are great questions. I'm gonna have to answer those when I see you at the food hub. You're gonna make me do homework tonight, Judith.
Okay, dude, I'm not real. It's Tom White's fault. He's the one that kind of got me interested in some of this stuff. So, seriously, because you said we are sort of, a mega point for the ginseng. Why is it in Appalachian Mountains? And is it because of this, not just the fact that it's been cold up here, but that we had the little ice age and before that
got pushed down. It probably got pushed down just like Fraser fir. And the woods used to be, from accounts that I've read, historical accounts, it used to be everywhere. Like when there was a market for it, granted, it was probably as prolific as chestnut trees. The large chestnut forests, and there's And some of the diggers that I know that really go into areas that people don't travel that much anymore, they still find really large patches of ginseng.
Wow.
But it takes the amount of time and effort and sweat equity that very, very few hobby diggers are willing to do. I know one particular digger, that's his income source. He harvests and dries anywhere from 50 to 75 pounds of ginseng per year. And you can do the math on that wild ginseng calculation that I said. That is his source of income, primary source of income.
Wow. That's been great. Thank you. I'll see you at the food hub with your answers.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking us on this ginseng journey with you and helping us appreciate more of the last century. So yeah, just a fantastic book. Thank you so much for writing it and for sharing so much information with us this evening.